Buongiorno, io sono Luca Dondoni, sono un ex alunno del collegio Ghislieri, mi sono laureato in filosofia nel 2019 e ora svolgo ricerca presso il King's College di Londra e sono grato al collegio per avermi dato possibilità di presentare il mio lavoro come parte di questa importante iniziativa Non fermiamo la cultura. Prima di cominciare la presentazione, una precisazione. Visto che le slides che utilizzerò durante la mia presentazione, il paper originario su cui questa è basata e anche la letteratura secondaria che viene utilizzata nel paper sono tutte di lingua inglese, ho scelto di svolgere l'intera presentazione in lingua inglese. Molto bene. So today I'm going to present my paper whose title is Diogenes of Apollonia as a Moderate Panpsychist. So I'm going to talk to you about a philosopher who I hold particularly dear and a really underestimated philosopher, Diogenes of Apollonia. So let's begin. So first of all, let's take a look at the objectives. So what I will aim to establish in my paper, first and foremost, is to establish Diogenes as the first philosopher to whom we can confidently ascribe a view which I shall call moderate panpsychism. And two further objectives, entwined objectives, will follow. First of all, I will aim to establish MP, moderate panpsychism, as a view significantly different from the Milesian's theories of reality, and argue that this can really testify to Diogenes' theoretical novelty and so innovatory power. And the last objective, which has to do with scholarship, I think, and with my approach to the text and to the production of Diogenes. I will aim to establish my reading of Diogenes as an advocate of MP as a good reading that can integrate the different aspects of Diogenes' worldview, be them metaphysical, cosmological, psychological, into one consistent and unified picture. And so we'll argue that my reading has to be preferred as it can subsume the different aspects of his view into one consistent account. So before starting with the fragment, let's take a look at the structure of my talk. First of all, I will introduce the figure of Diogenes and say a bit about how the commentators, both in antiquity and more recently, have approached and regarded the figure of the philosopher. I will then proceed and try to sketch out Diogenes' account of physical reality. I will then introduce Thales' understanding of soul as connected with the notion of motion, the cases of amber and magnets. And I will then approach the very core of my research and thus argue that Diogenes did not advocate the very same view, the very same version of panpsychism that can be attributed to Thales. I will then conclude trying to take a look at the big picture. So sketch out Diogenes' overall worldview, and I will define it as an instance of a mind-based monistic outlook. And finally, draw some conclusions. So let's begin with the tradition. So we don't know really very much about Diogenes' life. We know that he was born in Apollonia. We don't even know which Apollonia, whether the one in Crete or the one in Phrygia, but we're sure that he spent most of his lifetime in Athens and that he was active in the 5th century before Christ. So Diogenes, I said in the beginning that I hold particularly dear this philosopher. And the scholarship does not really. Diogenes was never been really highly regarded. Both in antiquity, Aristophanes made fun of him and of his theories in the clouds, and also by modern commentators. So let's see, Diels states that Diogenes is an eclectic philosopher, whereas Jäger thinks he's a second-rate natural philosopher, quite a harsh comment. And finally, Barnes contend that he is not really a thinker of vast innovatory power. So the underlying idea, which is quite widespread in scholarship, is that Diogenes was merely an imitator, a late advocate of some views that were really out of date for the period he was active in. So, and these theories were the Ionians' worldviews, where the Ionian school followers were Thales, Anaximander, and Anaximenes, where the latter was arguably Diogenes' mentor. So let's try and draw a general picture of Diogenes' account of physical reality. In this section, I will focus on basically 4 fragments: B2, B3, B4, 3 and B4 very briefly, and B5. And I chose to do this. Basically, I chose these fragments because these fragments, in these fragments, Diogenes really tackles the cosmological order, so the metaphysical and cosmological aspect of his overall worldview. So these fragments are relevant for my research. So if we look at the fragment, the first thing that we notice is that Diogenes thinks that there is only one thing. So that all things that exist in the cosmos are ultimately constitutive of the same thing. One thing that all things are. So, and this is the case, so the argument for this claim is that because otherwise change and alteration would not be possible. So the main thought here is that if 2 things were conceived of as metaphysically distinct and separate in a strong way, so mutually exclusive, then they could not interact with each other. And then the argument goes that if you look at the natural world, we observe that things do interact with each other. And so therefore they must have a common nature. So let's take a step back and try and consider this claim. If 2 things were conceived of as metaphysically exclusive, then they could not interact with each other. So I think a good way to explain the reasoning, Diogenes' reasoning behind this claim would be to refer to modern view, a contemporary view, which is substance or Cartesian dualism, and the problem, the interaction problem for the view. So Diogenes' claim, we have seen it. The view, what's the view? Substance dualism is the view that in nature there exist 2 kinds of things, 2 metaphysically different kinds, namely things that are extended and things that are capable of thought. A further claim would be that these 2 kinds, mind and body, do not only have distinct metaphysical natures, but one can well conceive of mind as being placed in the world without the property of extension being instantiated, and vice versa. So that it's perfectly conceivable to find in the world minds without the property of extension being instantiated, and so on. So what's the problem here? So the problem is quite intuitively rendered by the classic billiard ball example. So picture 2 billiard balls. If we conceive of causation as only by impact, say, one billiard ball can move and affect the other billiard ball because they both share the same metaphysical constitution, the same metaphysical makeup. That is, they both instantiate the property of extension, their bodies. And accordingly, if we conceive of causation of one single kind, it's not very clear from a causal point of view, how can something that is not extended affect something that is extended? So the reasoning here is that the 2 kinds of question, things that are capable of thought and things are extended, lack the communality, the homogeneity necessary for interaction. So Diogenes' conclusion here is that in order for physical entities to causally interact with each other, and we observe in nature that they do, one must concede that the metaphysical nature of entities cannot be posited as conceivable independently from one fundamental kind. So there is the need for a common shared nature. And Graham thinks that this property of ontological homogeneity serves thus as the necessary condition for causal interaction. So this is the argument behind Diogenes' claim that a shared constitutive ground is needed to account for the natural world. So let's move on. Fragment B5. There are two main aspects to this fragment. First of all, tropoi and the theory of change. So we've seen how, according to Diogenes, the natural world is entirely grounded in a single same thing, is constituted by one same thing. But what about the actual objects that we find in the world? So these are differentiated sorts of the same thing. How does the process of differentiation works? So how does the individuation of the singular property works in Diogenes' picture? Well, it works according to the tropoi, so the axis of differentiations. So I submit here that we can see the tropoi as structural basic physical properties. So they are axis of differentiations, first of all, so that if one could these are free, and these tropoi are free and are heat, moisture, and motion. So what does axis of differentiation mean? If one could individuate the exact same values of heat, moisture, and motion that a single entity exhibits on the axis, well, then she could provide a full description of the entity. So the same thing undergoes the process of differentiation and assumes some values on these axes of differentiations. If we could individuate the precise values that an entity, a particular entity, displays on these axes, we would have a full description of the essence of the entity. That is, we would have all the information that we need to pick out that precise individual entity out of the totality of the entities that exist in the cosmos. Then, structural properties. So I believe that we can see this tropoi as the properties that constitute the very formal structure of physical reality. So the basic, they constitute the very basic structure of reality in terms of properties, dispositional properties. So we can see the fundamental stuff, the fundamental constituent, as the bearer of these basic properties. So in this picture, the tropoi are the basic dispositional properties that are out there in the world, whereas the fundamental constituent is what bear the properties, the categorical ground. Then basic, so heat, moisture, and motion are the properties that are responsible, as we have seen, for the individuation of the all singular individual entities that populate the physical world. So I submit here that they might be seen as the basic properties that modern physics individuates. So spin, mass, and charge. I'm not really an expert on physics and science in general, and my friends Danny and Panda gave a talk for this initiative will make me pay for this claim. But yes, I believe that as the modern physicist individuates spin, mass, and charge as the very basic structural properties of the natural world, Diogenes thought of the tropoi in the very same way. Further, from this overall picture, it follows a particular understanding on the process of change. So Diogenes conceived of change in qualitative terms, so as an alteration, in sharp contrast with his mentor, Anaximenes, who regarded the modification of density as the determining factor for the individuation process. so for the differentiation of the singular entities. So this particular change, like modification in understanding of the theory of change, might be due to Diogenes' will to stick to the Eleatic canon, to the Parmenidean metaphysics. And actually, Daniel Graham individuates and finds in this particular new understanding of the theory of change the main feature of novelty in the whole production of Diogenes. I don't think that the theory of change, I completely agree with Graham, this is really new stuff, but I don't think that the theoretical novelty of Diogenes' proposal is exhausted by his theory of change. Let's move on. Second aspect of fragment B5 has to do with hair. Hair, which is the fundamental constituent. We are told that hair is the fundamental constituent. And to hair, it is attributed intellection. So we are told that hair is what men believe it is engaged in intellection. So first of all, what's the metaphysical status of intellection? It is sharply different from the one of the physical properties, be them the individual physical properties that we observe in nature and also of the tropoid. Indeed, Noesis intellection adheres directly to the fundamental stuff, and this is a crucial point. So intellection in Diogenes' picture of reality is ontologically prior to the physical properties, so to the singular differentiations, different sorts, and to the access. So a puzzling aspect of the fragment has to do with the term Noesis. So why did Diogenes choose to use Noesis, so intellection, the activity, and not intelligence, nous, the faculty? So I submit here that this is due to his strict monism. So Diogenes' hair, the fundamental constituent, cannot be seen as a substance which is distinct from the metaphysical outlook of the natural world in general. So it is the very constituent of everything that exists. Thus the choice of the term Noesis as indicating the activity and not the faculty of intellect aims, I believe, at emphasizing that the activity of hair is immanent to the world. And so that the intelligent constituent, the intelligent entity in the world does not affect, does not impact on the natural world from a privileged, separate standpoint, as is in Anaxagoras' picture of reality, where mind causes the process of change and of differentiation, being separate from the natural world. So the bottom line here is that hair seems to be capable of thought, thinking, and understanding might be seen as the primary activity it is engaged in. So I think we have here good reasons to believe that we should treat Noesis as a mental property. So as a property that pertains to mentality, to mind in general. And thus claim that Diogenes' picture of reality so far is characterized by a mind-based monistic outlook. And so I completely follow Lux here, who claims that the emphasis in Diogenes' picture of reality is not on teleology, but rather on noetics. And actually Lux believes that this mind-based monistic outlook is the very feature of novelty that we can find in Diogenes' picture of reality. As said for Graham, I do believe this is a really crucial point in Diogenes' picture of reality, and I don't believe that this exhausts the novelty, the innovatory power of this underestimated philosopher, as we shall see. So now we have the picture, Diogenes' picture of reality. I won't go through the whole claims, we've already done that. So yes, let's move on. So, okay, is Diogenes a panpsychist? Because my paper is titled Diogenes as a Moderate Panpsychist. So is him panpsychist? So we have seen that Diogenes believed that everything that exists in the cosmos is ultimately made of air. And air, which is present in everything and everything partakes in it, is inherently endowed with intelligence. So, if we take panpsychism to be the view that everything in the cosmos possesses some kind of mentality, then the answer is yes. We can confidently attribute panpsychism to Diogenes. But we have also seen how scholarship is quite unanimous. I mean, it's quite a widespread belief in scholarship to regard Diogenes as not more than judicious eclectic and an imitator. So Barnes says that he is said to have inherited and revived the monistic insights of the early Milesians. So from this, I think it would be reasonable to expect, I mean, we should expect to find some kind of panpsychism in the early Milesians, right? And in fact, we do. So Thales, which is arguably the first of the Ionian school, the founder on the Ionian school, he introduced his theory of soul in connection with the notion of motion and with the cases of ensouled magnets and pieces of amber. So let's take a look at the fragments. The first fragment, which is a testimonium actually. So we can, from this fragment, we can really get the idea that magnets and amber are ensouled. So the argument behind the Thales' claim about the ensoulment of magnets and pieces of amber has to do with motion. So they're said to be ensouled because they are capable of producing motion without being themselves moved from something else, an external source. But if we have to stick to the letter of the text, we can just infer that some of the objects which we ordinarily regard as devoid of, as lifeless, as mindless, devoid of any mental dimension, are held by Thales to possess a soul. Of course, this prompts the question, I believe, whether all the objects which we ordinarily take as lifeless and mindless are in fact ensouled. So two testimonia are relevant for this question. So in the first testimonium, which is taken from Diogenes of Apollonia, the author seems to be saying that Thales thought that all the objects that apparently are soulless are in fact given a soul, are in fact ensouled. So if we proceed to a joint reading of the previous fragment, the previous testimonium, with this testimonium, we can get the idea that the statement of 11:822a may be interpreted, may be taken as to emphasize that even stones are ensouled. So magnets, Thales uses magnets and pieces of amber to convey the idea that even things that are not really taken as, you know, endowed with a mind or a soul are in fact ensouled. So this is all about emphasis. And the report thus leads to the claim, the idea that Thales was indeed a panpsychist, as he claimed that everything actually had a soul, even stones. So let's take a look to the second testimony from the Anima. So about the second testimonium, we have two competing interpretations, two different readings. So Aristotle on one side reads the testimonial as implying a universal induction, leading to the conclusion that all things have soul, thus identifying gods with souls. So Aristotle says that we should take gods at the end of the testimonium as meaning souls, and thus that Thales claimed that all things that exist in the cosmos are full of souls. On the other hand, KRS, they suggest that the term pleres, which is full of, may be read as meaning containing a great number of. So if we look again at the testimonium and we buy KRS interpretation, the Thales here is reported to be saying, that if we looked at the totality of the entities that exist in the cosmos, then we would be able to see a great number of souls, maybe a surprisingly high number of souls. But from this statement, it does not follow that every single entity that exists in the cosmos has a soul of its own, or maybe a share in a world soul. But it doesn't follow that everything is ensouled individually. So, and this reading is provided as a cautious interpretation, and which resists the universal induction, from the isolated cases of the magnets, of course, to all the totality of the existing entities. And I believe, and which is my claim, this is an attempt to make Thales' view more considerate, more reasonable. I think that Aristotle's interpretation has to be preferred. And I believe this because I really think we shouldn't dismiss the possibility of the bold induction, even more so on the basis of reasonability. So even KRS, they admit that this universalizing tendency is the hallmark, this is the very hallmark of the early Greek philosophical tradition. And I put here a quote from Karl Popper about the pre-Socratics and philosophy of science. And Popper, here is really stressing the point that whereas we, in modern times, in contemporary era, we proceed slowly and cautiously from observations and singular observations, and then to a theory, the pre-Socratics were all about producing bold theories about the cosmos, about the world. They were not really interested in observations of oranges, but in cosmology. This is just to say that we shouldn't really dismiss the possibility of the induction, of the universal induction. And as I said, even more so on the basis of reasonability, because these categories do not apply to the early Greek philosophical tradition. So let's move on. From the overall picture of Thales' theory of soul and in connection with motion, magnets, and amber, we can get a really, a definition, a synthetic definition of his view. So I claim that we can attribute to Thales strong panpsychism, where strong panpsychism is the view that everything that exists in the cosmos has a soul, either one of its own or share in a world soul. And this regardless of the physical properties that that particular entity bears. So this is like the strong version of panpsychism is arguably the traditional version of panpsychism. Everything has a soul. So is it a good view? So yeah, let's just say that there is an intuitive probe, which is better explained in cogent terms. So if everything that exists in the cosmos has a soul, and soul is the principle of motion, then one can provide a causally closed picture of reality. So you don't have really to take the pain of finding particular physical causes for all the phenomena that are observable in the natural world, because those phenomena that are not straightforwardly accountable for in physical terms, they are in psychological terms, so in terms of soul, in the activity of soul. Now, the main weakness of the theory has already been highlighted in connection with KRS. This theory is highly counterintuitive, and this has to do with the universal induction. The main thought here is that one may accept Thales' argument that magnets and amber, they have souls because they can produce motion without being themselves moved from an external source. But why extend this claim to all non-motive stones? And why extend this claim to all existing entities? So, okay, we have established so far that Diogenes is not really highly regarded by the tradition. He is said to be an imitator of the early Ionians, e.g. Thales. Then we have established that if we look at his picture of physical reality, Diogenes might be seen as a panpsychist. We have seen that Thales, yes, Thales can be called a strong panpsychist. We can attribute some panpsychism or traditional panpsychism to Thales. So where do we go from here? I think that given all of this, it would be reasonable if scholarship is right, if the tradition has it right about Diogenes, then we should expect Diogenes to be a strong panpsychist, as Thales. I don't think that's true. I don't think that's accurate. So I think that Diogenes' version of panpsychism, so he really was a panpsychist, and the scholarship is quite right, but his version of panpsychism is much more refined, much more sophisticated than the version that Thales held. So how can I establish that? So first of all, I need to show that Diogenes was not a strong panpsychist. And in order to prove this, it would be sufficient to show on the one hand that in Diogenes' picture, not all entities possess a unified singular mind, but on the other hand, I will still hold that in Diogenes' picture of reality, mentality is a ubiquitous and fundamental feature of reality. But we, from the fragments, we are presented with some sort of dilemma. Let's look again at the fragments. So let's take into consideration fragment B5b, second part of fragment B5. So on the one hand, from fragment B2 and B5, first part, we were said the intellection is not itself one of the tropoi, and it is not a physical property, so a differentiated sort. Rather, it is prior, ontologically prior to both of them. And so for this follows that the particular state of the tropoi should not affect the presence or not of intellection, as the latter is prior to or more primitive than the tropoi. So this is to say, let's put an example. So this is to say that if we take a particular entity in the world, the values that that entity exhibits on the axis of heat, moisture, and motion do not preclude that entity to possess intellection, as intellection is realized on more primitive level. On the other hand, it's quite clear from the fragments that Diogenes believed that entities such as plants, statues, and other worldly objects, despite being constitutive of air and despite air being inherently endowed with intellection, they do not engage in intellection themselves. So this is the dilemma. These two claims are incompatible with each other. So there is a possible way out, I think. So one might separate, on the one hand, one entity having intellection taken as a whole, as a unity, and on the other hand, every bit of an entity having intellection. So we can say that for every bit of an entity to possess intellection, a particular configuration of values on the tropoi is not required. Whereas for an entity taken as a whole, as a unity, to possess a singular process of intellection, a singular mind, some structure, that is, a certain configuration of physical properties is required. So if we apply this theoretical structure to the reading of fragments, we can claim that in order for an entity to have a soul and thus to develop a singular process of intellection, the entity must exhibit a physical structure that allows warm air to circulate. So the necessary condition for this physical structure is precisely a certain configuration of values on the tropoi. So the apparatus, the physical apparatus, that is an arrangement of the physical properties, enables that entity to develop a singular process of intellection, a singular individual mind. From this also follows that different entities with different physical apparatuses develop different degrees or types of intelligence. So, we are now in the position of formulating the definition of Diogenes' view. So, I believe that we can, given all of this, I believe that we can attribute to Diogenes the view that mentality is realized at the fundamental level of reality and is ubiquitous in natural world, because the fundamental level of reality is constituted by hair, and hair is inherently endowed, engaged in intellection. However, for an entity to possess a singular process of intellection, a unified mind, some physical conditions, that is, a particular arrangement or configuration of values on the tropoi, some conditions have to be met. Now, is this a good view or a better view than strong panpsychism? As you can see, there are only pros here. First of all, MP retains all the causal benefits of the stronger version of the view. The theory of change, in tandem with the action, the cosmic and individual action of intelligence, can well account for all the interactions between the worldly objects. Secondly, MP is not affected by the counterintuitiveness from which the stronger view suffers. As we have seen, the moderate panpsychist does not need to claim that literally everything that exists in the world has a singular process of intellection, that is, an individual mind or a share in a world soul. So she doesn't need to claim that. And the last advantage of the view is that the view MP, moderate panpsychism, provides a really good answer to the mind-body problem, whereas the mind-body problem is the problem of explaining how human and animal experience, mentality, can come out of dead inert matter. So if one posits mentality at the fundamental level of reality, as the moderate panpsychist does, one does not really have to worry about explaining how one can move from something that is mindless, dead inert matter, to something that is endowed with mind, like we human beings. As there is no, in principle, there is no such thing that is completely mindless, because at the fundamental level of reality, hair, which is the fundamental constituent, is inherently engaged in intellection. So let's just take a look at the big picture. I think mind-based monistic outlook is a very good definition, a very good label for Diogenes' picture of reality. So, and Diogenes, at the end of the day, really described a differentiated material world, in which objects of the world are differentiated source of hair, which undergoes a process of change, qualitative change, so not in terms of decrease, increase, according to the axis of differentiation, which are structural, basic, physical properties. Further, this fundamental constituent is inherently endowed, engaged in intellection. We should take Noesis' intellection as a mental property, and we should regard Diogenes' system as Diogenes' intellection as immanent to the physical reality and not separated from it, as in Anaxagoras. So, a differentiated material world with mind as its essential feature. So everything that exists in the cosmos can engage in intellection because everything is ultimately constituted of hair. However, not every entity that exists in the cosmos exhibits a unified, singular process of intellection. In order for an entity to have a singular mind, the entity must bear some physical properties that allow it to have the hair, the warm hair, circulate throughout its body. These differences in terms of physical properties, values on the axis between the individual entities, also entail differences in degree and quality of intelligence. but they do not, and I will stress this one last time, I promise, they do not preclude to the entity to have its bits, the bits it is composed of, intelligent. So let's draw some conclusions. First of all, the view which I have called moderate panpsychism, MP, has no precedent in the early Greek tradition. As we have seen, Thales and the Ionian school followers were advocates of a different view, which I called strong panpsychism, which was really much more primitive and coerced than moderate panpsychism. So Diogenes is, if my arguments are sound, it would be the first philosopher to whom we could confidently attribute this view. Secondly, from this follows that if my reading is sound, Diogenes should be regarded as an innovator rather than an imitator. So he, of course, manifestly elaborated on the Ionians' cosmological theories. He built up on the work of his mentors, but he entirely revolutionized their understanding of the place of mind within physical reality and the connection, the relationship between mind and matter. So finally, my reading of Diogenes as a moderate panpsychist has also the dialectical advantage of integrating both the feature of novelty identified by Graham, that is the theory of change, and the structure of the tropoi, in connection with the ones individuated by Lux, that is the mind-based ontology. And my account of Diogenes' worldview really subsumes these two aspects of novelty into one consistent, unified picture. So this is all. Here's the bibliography that I use in my paper, and grazie dell'attenzione. Tengo a ringraziare il collegio Ghislieri nuovamente per avermi dato la possibilità di presentare il mio lavoro. Spero che sia stato di interesse. Colgo anche l'occasione per ringraziare il mio term tutor, Dr. Joachim Haufer-Heide, i colleghi del First Year Research Seminar e i partecipanti alla conferenza Graduate Philosophy Conference at Brown University per il loro feedback su versioni precedenti di questo articolo. Grazie ancora e arrivederci.